So now we're going to talk about trophic structure and food webs and food chains and that type of thing. So you're familiar with the food chain at this point in your academic career, right? So you've got, your producers at the bottom, and then consumers are going to eat those, and something's going to eat them, and that's called the food chain. So I've got pictures of food chains right here. Actually, that's going to be different. There we go. That's a food chain, right? So you can see you've got some sort of plant or phytoplankton at the bottom, and then they're going to get eaten by an herbivore that's going to get eaten by a carnivore, and so on and so on. So that's going to be a food chain. Now, scientists decided that that's not exactly the best way to show how this all works, because you might have something that, yes, it eats mice, but it might also eat plants. So it fits into the food chain at different points. And that's where they came up with these, which are food webs. And these are way more accurate because it shows every level that something is going to actually fit into, right? So when we go back to this, one of those things that we haven't talked about yet is going to be those trophic levels. So if we look at that previous picture of the food chain, each of these here is a trophic level. Primary producers are going to be the plants and the phytoplankton, usually photosynthetic. Primary consumers are going to eat the primary producers. Secondary consumers eat primary consumers, and so on, right? And just to show you how it should be a food web, if you think about it, humans could fit in a lot of different places here. We're quaternary consumers and we're also primary consumers, right? So that's why a food web is a lot more accurate. Now, the important thing that you want to know about these food chains is that Charles Elton was going to be the scientist who said they're usually 4 or 5 links, not more than that. And the reason for that is because energy gets lost from one level to the next. And so what happens is you run out of energy at the top of the food chain is how it basically works. So what limits the length of the food chain is the energetic hypothesis. And that's basically that we're very inefficient with energy transfers. We waste a lot of energy staying warm. We waste a lot of energy chasing after prey, that type of stuff. And we'll get into that into a later chapter. So the dynamic stability hypothesis goes along with that and says long food chains tend to be way less stable than short ones. So the shorter they are, the more stable they tend to be. The longer they are, there's more places where things could go wrong, is how you can think about it. Okay, so let's talk about dominant species, because obviously that's going to have a huge impact on community structure. So dominant species are going to be the ones that have the highest abundance or highest biomass, which would be if you were to take them all and weigh them in a community. So if you look at this, you can see that these trees are going to be the dominant species in this ecosystem. The reason we care about that is because if we were to remove the dominant species, this whole landscape would change, right? There's going to be more sunlight, there's going to be more water, there's going to be more space, everything, right? So it's totally going to change over. So they're important to look at. But what's even more important is going to be keystone species. Keystone species are going to be ones that have some sort of regulatory effect on the community. So when they get removed, it affects everybody. So perfect example is going to be in this situation. So you have sea urchins, and back there you have kelp. Kelp is like the algae that grows. So there's a type of sea urchin that feeds on the kelp. And there are sea otters that actually feed on the urchins. Aren't they adorable? Now, what has happened is these sea otters are actually being hunted for their pelts, for their fur. And so what do you think is happening? Well, the urchin population is just exploding. And so when the urchin population is exploding, what's going to happen to the kelp forests? The kelp forests are going to get eaten and go away. And what's going to happen to all the fish that lay their eggs in the kelp? They're going to collapse. And then what eats the fish are going to collapse. All because this otter got taken away, right? So that means it's a keystone species where it has such a huge regulatory effect on the community. Prairie dogs are going to be another example of a keystone species. So these guys, they dig those burrows, right? And a lot of times they'll dig a burrow and they'll say, oh, I don't really like that one, and they'll desert it. Well, there are these cute little guys. Where are they? These little guys. Burrowing owls. And burrowing owls don't like to actually make their own burrows. They like to take over ones that have already been made. Perfect. So they can actually use the ones from the prairie dogs. The other thing that's a little sad is prairie dogs are actually really important prey items for hawks, coyotes, that type of thing. And then the last thing is that they actually have those guards that we talked about, and they mow the grass all around the area so they can see better, and the grass actually benefits from them doing that. So you can see if we took them away, that would affect so many different species, right? So a keystone species is going to have that regulatory effect. All right, let's go back to here. Let's finally start with the disturbance and community structure. So disturbances are going to be something that is a huge change to the community. It could be an event like a fire. It could be a mudslide. It could be a huge storm. Or, unfortunately, it could be human activities. And so what we need to think about is most of the time disturbances are a normal kind of thing that communities need, right? As far as fires go, we need fires to go through and get rid of the old diseased trees. It's a good thing. What is a problem is when we have rich people living near the trees, then that's an issue. Or when we've let the trees get too old and because we've been preventing fires and then we get these crazy fires that happen. You know, weather events, you know, like we have these crazy storms that come through in mudslides. Well, that could totally, you know, unearth some new seeds and, you know, new opportunities for new plants. So those are going to be the type of things that we can see. Now, human activity is going to be the worst type of disturbance, and unfortunately, it's the most widespread, and it's also the hardest for a community to rebound from. And I have some pretty powerful pictures to show you what I'm talking about. So here you have an example of a forest that's been burned by a fire, right? And if you look at that 1 year later, you can already see that everything is coming back, right? So a fire is a natural event that is going to happen due to lightning or whatever, and so it can come back from that. Whereas if you look at this, you've got a beautiful coral reef, right? And you've got all these fish and all sorts of coral, everything living on it. And then what happened was a human disturbance, which is going to be trawling. Trawling is basically lowering a net down that's weighted and it sits on the bottom and then going forward with the boat so that you can scoop everything up like shrimp and fish and stuff. And this is how that same place looks after the human disturbance has gone through. That's not going to rebound as quickly at all, right? So you can see the effects of a human disturbance versus a natural disturbance. And the last thing that we're going to talk about is going to be ecological succession. So after a disturbance has happened, ecological succession is going to happen, which is where, let's say you have, you know, the grasses coming and then the trees come and so on and so on. That's ecological succession. So there's two types. You have primary and secondary. Primary is going to happen in an area where there's no soil whatsoever. So like a glacier receding and you just have rocks exposed, or a new volcanic island where there's just rock, right? So what's going to happen in primary succession is there is no soil, but soil needs to be created. So you're going to have things like mosses and lichens, which are those colorful things that grow on rocks, and that's going to help with the development of soil. Now, secondary succession is going to be what happens after an event, but there is soil present, so there is dirt. So you could think of a deserted farm or a burnt field or a burnt forest, and so that's just going to be the different type of succession where it doesn't have to make soil because it's already there, just you need the plants to come back after that. So that's going to be community structure. I hope you enjoyed it.